She learned the truth on a night when the house should have been asleep. In the night eclipse estate, wolves did not sleep because hunger kept watch. Not hunger for food, but for dominance, for weakness, for something soft to tear apart. Myra Holloway understood this before she understood anything else, because she had survived it. The house breathed around her in the dark, timber and stone murmuring with restrained power, and she moved through it knowing that one wrong sound, one wrong look, one wrong breath could remind everyone why she existed here at all. She lived in a place that smiled by day and sharpened its teeth by night, and she was the proof that mercy in this house was never free. Myra had been kept in the estate under the name of Charity for as long as she could remember. The official version said she was an orphan taken in by the pack after a border skirmish years ago, too young to be sent away, too useless to be respected. The unofficial version lived in the way doors closed before she reached them, and conversations died when she entered a room. She slept in a converted attic space beneath slanted beams where winter crept through the walls and summer trapped heat like a punishment. Her name was never written on the board in the dining hall. Her meals were whatever remained after everyone else had eaten, and sometimes nothing at all. Her hands told the real story, skin split and scarred from soap and stone, from metal polish and freezing water, from scrubbing floors that would never truly belong to her. She was an omega without a wolf. That label followed her like a scent that never faded. It excused everything that happened to her, every shove, every insult, every reminder that she was a biological mistake. In a world where strength defined worth, she represented an error that had not been corrected. Other omegas at least shifted, at least had something inside them that could snarl back. Myra had nothing, or so everyone believed. She moved carefully, shoulders slightly rounded, gaze trained on the ground, learning the geography of cracks in stone floors better than the faces of those who passed her. Silence became her armor, because speaking only gave others something to crush. No one wore cruelty as elegantly as Vivienne Marrow. The Beta's daughter treated the estate as her inheritance long before anyone officially granted it to her. She was tall, polished, and precise, her beauty sharp rather than warm, her movements always watched. Vivienne had learned early that humiliation was most effective when delivered calmly. She never shouted at Myra. She corrected her posture, her pace, her breathing, her existence, with the same detached patience one used to train an animal. Every correction reinforced the same lesson. Myra's place was beneath everyone else's feet, and Vivienne intended to keep it that way. The coming of the winter solstice only sharpened her interest. The closer the celebration drew, the more Vivienne seemed to enjoy reminding Myra how far she stood from the world that would soon gather under the estate's chandeliers. The days leading up to the solstice blurred into exhaustion. Nobles and pack leaders from across the territory were expected, and the night eclipse estate prepared like a stage awaiting its audience. Floors were polished until reflections shimmered. Silverware was scrubbed until mirrors stared back from every surface. Myra was assigned to everything no one else wanted to touch. She worked from before dawn until long after sunset, wrists aching, lungs burning from chemical fumes and cold air. When the other servants whispered about watching the ball from the upper balcony, Myra said nothing. The right to look was denied to her before she could ask. Her presence, Vivienne insisted, would be a distraction. Myra accepted the verdict without protest, because protest only made punishments creative. Outwardly, she appeared empty. Inside, something had begun to shift. It was subtle at first, a tension in the air that raised goosebumps on her arms even when the halls were warm. As the solstice approached, the estate seemed to vibrate like a wire pulled too tight. Myra felt it most when she was alone, scrubbing late at night while the house settled around her. It was not fear, though fear was familiar. It was anticipation, sharp and unwelcome, like standing too close to an edge she had not chosen. She told herself it was nothing, another trick of exhaustion, another symptom of a life spent bracing for impact. There was also Rowan Blackwood. The alpha of Night Eclipse had taken over years ago, and his presence carried weight even when he said nothing. Myra had learned the sound of his footsteps on stone, the way conversations altered when he passed, the way the air itself seemed to acknowledge him. In the weeks before the solstice, she became aware of something she could not explain. When Rowan walked through a corridor and she happened to be there, her body reacted before her mind could intervene. Her pulse quickened. Her senses sharpened painfully. It was not attraction in any shape she recognized. It felt more like standing between two storms, knowing either could destroy her. She despised that reaction, despised herself for it, because omegas like her did not get to feel anything toward alphas except fear. She avoided him when she could, kept her head down when she could not. Still, the reaction persisted, quiet and relentless. The closer the solstice came, the harder it was to ignore. Myra did not imagine futures or romance. She imagined danger, exposure, disaster. She knew enough of pack law to understand that whatever stirred inside her was forbidden. Her existence was already precarious. Adding attention from an alpha would not elevate her, it would erase her. That knowledge did nothing to stop the pull, only made it more terrifying. On the night of the solstice, the estate transformed. Warm light spilled from doorways. Music vibrated through walls and floors, echoing like a second heartbeat beneath the stone. Perfume and pheromones saturated the air, heavy with promises and power. Myra finished her last assignment with trembling hands, wiping down silver that gleamed too brightly, then retreated toward the servants' quarters as instructed. She stood there for a moment, listening to laughter and strings and the hum of hundreds of voices, feeling the separation like a physical barrier pressing against her chest. She should have gone to her attic room. She should have locked the door and waited for the night to pass. Instead, she made a choice she would later understand as instinct rather than rebellion. It was not hope that moved her, but a need she could not name. She wanted to see the world that had decided she did not belong in it. Not to join it, not to touch it, but to witness it once on her own terms. She retrieved the dress she had hidden for years, a simple dark fabric rescued from a donation crate, and mended so many times it barely remembered its original shape. It was not beautiful, but it was clean. She tied her hair back with shaking fingers and slipped into the narrow service passages that threaded through the estate like veins. These corridors were invisible to guests, built for staff and secrets, and Myra knew them better than any formal hallway. Her steps were silent, practiced. She followed the route upward until the sound of music grew louder, until the warmth of the ballroom pressed through stone and metal. The ventilation grate above the main hall was small and shadowed, positioned so that heat could escape without drawing attention. Myra crouched there, fingers gripping cold metal, heart racing hard enough to make her dizzy. Through the narrow slats, she saw everything. Light refracted through crystal chandeliers, scattering gold across polished marble. Gowns flowed like liquid color. Suits cut sharp silhouettes against the glow. The scent was overwhelming, layered and intoxicating, a storm of power and desire that made her head swim. From here, the people below looked unreal, like figures behind glass. Myra felt as though she were underwater, separated by an invisible wall. She watched hands gesture, heads tilt, bodies move in practiced rhythms. She saw Vivienne in red, radiant and assured, already occupying space as if it were hers by right. She saw Rowan near the center, dark-haired and still, a gravity well around which others unconsciously arranged themselves. Even from above, she felt the pressure of his presence, a pull that tightened her chest until breathing hurt. For a moment, she forgot herself. She forgot the cold attic, the cracked skin, the years of silence. She forgot what she was allowed to want. The music surged, and something inside her responded, an echo she did not understand. She leaned closer to the grate without realizing it, as if proximity could grant understanding. The house seemed to hold its breath with her, the tension she had felt for days finally reaching its breaking point. Myra did not know then that this single act of watching would shatter every rule that had kept her alive. She only knew that she was looking at a world that had been denied to her, and feeling, for the first time, that the denial itself was about to be tested. The night eclipse estate glowed below her, unaware that the weakest girl in its walls had already stepped across a line from which there was no return. The ballroom had been designed to impress and intimidate in equal measure, a cathedral of polished stone and calculated excess where power displayed itself openly and dared anyone to challenge it. Golden light poured from the chandeliers, refracted through crystal into hundreds of sharp reflections that danced across marble floors like blades. Every surface gleamed with intention. This was not a celebration meant to invite joy. It was a ritual meant to remind every guest exactly where they stood in the hierarchy of the night eclipse pack. At the center of it all stood Rowan Blackwood, the young alpha who had grown up beneath the weight of expectation like armor fused to his bones. From childhood, he had been shaped into an emblem rather than a man, trained to move with confidence, to speak with authority, to never hesitate in public. Tonight, he wore that role flawlessly. His posture was immaculate, his expression composed, his presence anchoring the room. Around him, alliances whispered themselves into being through glances and measured smiles. Every eye returned to him sooner or later, because this was his stage. At his side, Vivienne Marrow embodied a different kind of dominance. Draped in deep red velvet that caught the light like fresh blood, she appeared as both promise and warning. She moved through the crowd with practiced ease, already behaving as though the future had been signed and sealed in her favor. Guests looked at her and nodded knowingly, certain they were witnessing the inevitable pairing that would secure the Marrow family's influence for another generation. In their minds, the narrative was already written. Tonight was merely confirmation. Above them, hidden in shadow and metal, Myra Holloway watched. From the narrow darkness behind the ventilation grate, the ballroom appeared unreal, like a carefully constructed illusion. The music rose and fell in controlled waves, the rhythm steady and hypnotic. Laughter sparkled and faded. The scent was overwhelming, thick with pheromones, perfume, and power, a heady mixture that made Myra's senses ache. She felt out of place not because she was unseen, but because she understood with painful clarity that this world had not been built for someone like her. She tried to look away. She told herself that watching was dangerous, that she had already crossed a line simply by being here. But her gaze betrayed her. It lingered too long on Rowan, drawn by something deeper than curiosity. It was not desire in any form she recognized, but a pull that tightened her chest and sharpened her breath. The longer she looked, the stronger it became, as if the space between them was collapsing. Then it happened. The bond ignited without warning, not as a gentle revelation but as a violent intrusion. It tore through Myra like fire through dry leaves, a sudden, merciless certainty that left her gasping. There was nothing romantic in it, nothing soft or hopeful. It felt like being branded from the inside, her body reacting to a truth she had neither sought nor wanted. Panic surged immediately, cold and suffocating. She understood the implications instantly. An Omega without a wolf had no place in a destiny like this. In a world governed by strength and image, such a bond was not salvation. It was a death sentence. Below, Rowan stiffened. The reaction struck him before thought could intervene. His breath caught. His muscles locked. A sharp pressure bloomed in his chest, as unmistakable as it was unwelcome. His senses flared, cutting through the crowded room until one presence rose above all others, thin and electric, pulling at him with undeniable force. His body recognized the bond even as his mind recoiled from it. The change did not go unnoticed. Whispers rippled through the ballroom as guests registered the alpha's sudden tension. Conversations faltered. Heads turned. Vivienne noticed immediately. She followed the invisible line of Rowan's attention upward, her instincts sharp and predatory. The moment she understood what was happening, something cold settled behind her eyes. Threat assessment came naturally to her, and she recognized this for what it was, an anomaly that could shatter everything she had been positioning herself to claim. She moved decisively. Guards were alerted with subtle gestures, their attention redirected toward the upper structure of the hall. The music continued for a few heartbeats longer, a thin veneer of normalcy stretched to its limit. Then hands seized Myra. She was pulled from the shadows without ceremony. Her grip on the grate failed as fingers locked around her arms, dragging her backward through the narrow service passages. The sudden movement disoriented her, the heat of the bond clashing violently with the cold fear flooding her system. She did not fight. Years of survival had taught her that resistance only prolonged suffering. The transition from hidden corridors to the open ballroom was brutal. The doors opened, and light crashed over her like a physical force. She stumbled as she was thrust forward, losing balance and falling hard onto the marble floor. The sound echoed, sharp and final, cutting through the music. Silence followed. Hundreds of eyes turned toward her. Myra felt their weight immediately, pressing down until breathing became difficult. She was acutely aware of every detail: the unfamiliar dress clinging awkwardly to her body, the scrape of stone against her knees, the way her hands trembled as she tried to push herself upright. Against the immaculate crowd, she looked exactly like what she had always been told she was: a mistake brought into the light. The contrast was unforgiving. Polished shoes and silk hems framed her on all sides. Faces reflected shock, curiosity, disdain, and amusement in varying degrees. No one moved to help her. This was not confusion, it was assessment. Rowan approached slowly. From this distance, he no longer saw a vague presence hidden in the walls. He saw a girl kneeling on his ballroom floor, small and visibly out of place, her existence a disruption to the narrative he had spent his life embodying. The bond pulsed insistently between them, demanding acknowledgement, but he fought it with everything he had been taught. To him, this was not fate revealing itself. It was a catastrophe unfolding in public. He understood the implications with brutal clarity. A true bond to a servant, an omega without a wolf, would dismantle the image of strength he represented. It would invite doubt, ridicule, and political vulnerability. The pack would see not destiny, but weakness. In that moment, instinct urged him one way, and pride dragged him another. Pride won. The rejection, when it came, was absolute. It carried the full weight of authority, spoken not to resolve the bond quietly, but to erase it publicly. This was not a private denial born of confusion or fear. It was a declaration meant to reassert control, to remind the room who dictated reality. Every word landed like a blade, severing the connection with deliberate cruelty. The pain hit Myra instantly. It was not simply emotional, though the humiliation burned deeply. The bond tore at her from the inside, ripping through nerves and breath alike. Her vision blurred as agony radiated outward, a physical manifestation of being cast out by something her body had recognized as essential. She folded inward, fighting the scream that clawed its way up her throat. And still, she accepted it. By pack law, the rejection required acknowledgement to prevent madness from consuming both parties. Even as her world collapsed, Myra forced herself to complete the ritual, choosing clarity over vengeance. In doing so, she spared Rowan the consequences of a half-broken bond, even as he left her with nothing. It was an act of strength no one in the room recognized, drowned out by the spectacle of her disgrace. The decision to exile her followed swiftly, as if mercy itself were an inconvenience to be disposed of. Guards hauled her to her feet, their grip firm and impersonal. She was no longer a person to them, but a problem to be removed. The doors at the far end of the ballroom loomed, heavy and final. As they dragged her away, the music resumed. It crept back into the space cautiously at first, then swelled, louder than before, as though volume could smother guilt. Laughter followed, forced and brittle, and conversations picked up where they had left off. The ballroom reclaimed itself, eager to forget the interruption. Outside, the night swallowed Myra whole. She was pushed through the doors and into the snow, the cold striking her like a second rejection. The door slammed shut behind her, sealing warmth and light inside, leaving her alone in the dark. The estate loomed above, silent and indifferent, its windows glowing gold against the black sky. Inside, the night eclipse pack danced. Inside, the story continued without her. And on the frozen stone steps, Myra lay shaking, her breath tearing in and out of her chest. The echo of golden light still burned into her eyes. The cold outside the night eclipse estate should have ended her quickly. Snow covered the stone steps in a thin, merciless layer, and the air cut into Myra's lungs with every breath she dragged in. Her body hit the ground hard, momentum carrying her down the last few steps until she lay twisted at the base of the entrance, half buried in white. The heavy doors slammed shut above her, sealing warmth and music inside, and the sudden silence was almost louder than the rejection itself. This was how omegas like her were supposed to disappear, quietly, conveniently, forgotten before the next song ended. For a few seconds, the world narrowed to pain and cold. Myra's hands clawed weakly at the stone, fingers numb, skin burning and freezing at the same time. Her chest seized as she tried to breathe, every inhale shallow and sharp. The bond's rupture still screamed through her nerves, an echo of something that had existed only long enough to destroy her. She expected the cold to finish the job, to sink into her bones and slow everything down until there was nothing left to feel. It did not happen. Instead, the pain changed. The agony that had torn through her moments earlier did not fade. It transformed. The cold ceased to dominate her awareness, replaced by a heat that rose from somewhere far deeper than muscle or blood. It began as a pulse, slow and heavy, like a second heart beating beneath her ribs. With each thud, warmth spread outward, pushing back the numbness. Snow melted against her skin in hissing patches, steam ghosting into the night. Myra gasped, confusion slicing through her panic. Human bodies did not do this. She had known cold, hunger, exhaustion, and fear her entire life, but this sensation belonged to none of them. The heat intensified rapidly, coiling through her veins with an almost intelligent insistence. Her limbs trembled, not from hypothermia, but from pressure building inside her, demanding release. She rolled onto her side, then onto her back, breath tearing from her throat in broken bursts. Her spine arched involuntarily as the pulse surged again, stronger this time, forcing a hoarse sound from her chest that did not sound entirely human. Pain lanced through her bones, sharp and absolute, as if something inside her was rearranging itself without permission. This was not the chaotic, messy first shift described in pack lore. This was not a frightened animal tearing its way into existence. This felt deliberate, mechanical, ancient. It was as if a lock had finally been shattered, gears long frozen grinding back into motion after centuries of silence. Her bones cracked. The sound echoed against the stone steps, wet and visceral, followed by another and another as her skeleton began to restructure itself from the inside out. Her fingers spasmed, lengthening, joints stretching beyond human limits. Her skin burned as if branded, nerves lighting up in a network of unbearable sensation. She screamed then, but the sound fractured, splintering into something raw and feral that tore itself free of her throat. Fur erupted along her arms and spine, not in patches, but in a sweeping surge that felt like a tide breaking through her flesh. It was not the dull gray or brown of common wolves. It shone even in the dark, pale and reflective, catching moonlight and bending it into a cold, luminous sheen. Silver spread across her body like molten metal poured into a mold. Her spine elongated violently, vertebrae shifting as her posture collapsed forward. The world tilted and blurred as her vision sharpened past human limits, darkness peeling back to reveal crisp outlines and glowing heat signatures. Smells flooded her senses all at once. Snow, stone, iron, fear, power. The scent of the estate poured out through the doors she had been thrown from, layered and familiar, and something inside her responded with a deep, resonant awareness. When the transformation finally completed, the girl who had been cast into the snow was gone. In her place stood a massive silver wolf, towering over the steps, her presence warping the air around her. She was enormous, far larger than any alpha beast bred within the packs, her shoulders nearly level with the heavy doors behind her. Her fur gleamed like polished steel beneath moonlight, each movement sending ripples of light across her form. Her eyes burned gold, bright and intelligent, holding a depth that did not belong to an animal newly born. For a heartbeat, she stood still. The heat that had driven her transformation receded slightly, settling into a controlled, seething core beneath her ribs. Her breathing slowed, lungs drawing in cold air that no longer hurt. Awareness flooded her fully, sharper and more expansive than anything she had ever known. She understood, without words, that the thing sealed inside her had not been weakness. It had been restraint. She did not flee. The silver wolf turned back toward the estate. Each step she took sent tremors through the stone beneath her paws. Snow scattered as she moved, her claws biting effortlessly into marble and iron alike. The doors loomed before her, reinforced with steel bands and wards meant to deter attackers. They had never been designed to stop something like her. She did not charge. She struck once. The impact was catastrophic. Metal screamed as it warped and split, wood exploding inward under the force. The doors collapsed in a storm of splinters and shattered hinges, fragments flying across the ballroom floor like debris from a detonation. The music inside died instantly, cut off by the sheer violence of her arrival. Gasps and screams erupted as the silver wolf stepped through the wreckage. The golden light of the ballroom washed over her, reflecting blindingly off her fur. Guests stumbled backward, some falling, others dropping to their knees without conscious decision. It was not fear alone that drove them down. It was instinct. Every hierarchy written into their bones recoiled in the presence of something that existed beyond their rules. The silver wolf lowered her massive head slightly, eyes sweeping the room with calm, predatory awareness. Her gaze passed over nobles, betas, omegas, warriors. None could hold it. Bodies folded, spines bent, submission rippling outward in waves. Even those who fought the urge found their muscles locking, forced into reverence by a pressure they could not resist. Rowan remained standing. He stood amid the chaos, framed by shattered crystal and overturned tables, staring at the beast he had rejected moments earlier. The bond he had severed still echoed faintly inside him, twisted now into something bitter and aching. His confidence drained away as he took in the scale of her, the impossible reality of what she had become. This was not an anomaly. This was a legend stepping out of obscurity. For the first time, hunger flickered through him. Not desire, but loss. The understanding that he had cast aside something irreplaceable gnawed at him with vicious clarity. The silver wolf did not acknowledge him. Her presence alone was enough. From the upper balcony, movement stirred. A tall figure emerged from the shadows, slow and deliberate, as if he had been there all along. Cain Ravencroft, the Alpha King, leaned against the railing, his expression unreadable as he surveyed the devastation below. He had not been seen publicly in years, his absence the subject of rumor and speculation. Yet here he stood, unshaken by the sight that had driven an entire court to its knees. His eyes fixed on the silver wolf, and recognition sparked immediately. This was not surprise, it was confirmation. Cain descended from the balcony with controlled grace, boots crunching softly over debris. The space around him seemed to shift subtly, his own authority pressing outward, but it met resistance in the silver wolf's presence. Instead of clashing, the forces aligned, old power recognizing older still. He stopped several paces away. Where others bowed or froze, Cain simply acknowledged her. He did not reach for weapons. He did not issue commands. His posture communicated something far rarer in that room than fear or dominance. Respect. The silver wolf's ears flicked once. Her attention shifted to him fully, golden eyes narrowing as she assessed him with the same intelligence she had turned on the court. For a long moment, the two forces regarded each other, the air between them heavy with unspoken history and consequence. The fury that had driven her return began to ebb. Exhaustion crashed into her without warning, sharp and absolute. The massive form trembled, muscles shuddering as the energy that had fueled her awakening drained rapidly. Her breath hitched, coming in ragged bursts now that control demanded its price. The silver sheen of her fur dulled slightly, the light within it flickering. Her legs buckled. The transformation reversed with brutal speed. Bones snapped and shortened, fur retracting into skin that shimmered faintly as it reshaped itself. The wolf collapsed inward, shrinking and folding until a human form struck the marble floor with a hollow sound. The violence of the change left her motionless, curled instinctively against the cold stone, her body bare and trembling. Kane moved immediately. He shrugged off his coat and crossed the distance in long strides, draping the heavy fabric over her without hesitation. He lifted her with surprising ease, cradling her against his chest as if she weighed nothing at all. The residual heat from her transformation radiated through the coat, warming the air around them. Behind him, the ballroom remained frozen in stunned silence. The night eclipse estate lay in ruins, its polished image shattered beyond repair. Guests stared, kneeling among broken glass and splintered wood, struggling to process what they had witnessed. Rowan stood amid the wreckage, empty-handed and hollow, watching as the Alpha King carried away the silver legend he had condemned to death minutes earlier. For the first time in his life, pride was not what filled his chest. It was hunger. And far beneath it, something colder still, the knowledge that the world he understood had ended the moment the silver wolf awakened. Myra woke slowly, surfacing from darkness as if rising through deep water. For several long seconds she did not move, did not breathe deeply, did not open her eyes. Instinct told her to remain still, to assess before reacting. In her world, waking was dangerous. Waking meant exposure. Waking meant pain if she moved the wrong way. But nothing hurt. That realization struck her first, sharp and disorienting. Her body felt heavy but intact, wrapped in warmth rather than cold. The surface beneath her was soft, supportive, nothing like the narrow cot in the attic or the unforgiving stone floors she had grown accustomed to. When she finally inhaled fully, the air carried unfamiliar scents, clean linen, bitter medicine, and the faint, comforting trace of wood smoke. It smelled like preparation, not neglect. Her eyes opened. Above her stretched a high ceiling of dark timber crossed with iron beams, solid and deliberate. Light filtered in from tall windows cut deep into stone walls, pale and steady, illuminating drifting motes of dust. Beyond the glass she could see mountains, jagged and endless, their peaks wrapped in snow and cloud. The sight alone stole her breath. She had never been this high above the world, never seen land stretch so wide without fences or walls closing in. Panic followed immediately. Kindness, in Myra's experience, was never real. It was bait, a prelude to expectation or debt. Her pulse spiked as she pushed herself upright, muscles protesting weakly. The movement sent a wave of dizziness through her, but she fought it, scanning the room for restraints, guards, hidden watchers. She found none. No chains, no locks within reach. The door stood closed but unbarred. The hearth at the far wall held the dying warmth of a recently tended fire. The quiet pressed in around her, but it was not the suffocating silence of punishment. It was controlled, intentional, like the pause before something decisive. This was not a cell. That terrified her more than a prison ever could. Her body remembered what her mind tried to suppress. Heat flared faintly beneath her ribs, not the uncontrollable inferno of transformation, but an echo of it, a reminder of the power that had torn itself free. Her hands trembled as she drew the blanket closer around herself, fingers brushing skin that felt different now, more sensitive, more aware. She felt larger on the inside, as if something vast had settled into place and refused to be ignored. Memory returned in fragments. Snow, pain, silver light, the sound of doors breaking, the weight of a presence that had not tried to crush her. Cain Ravencroft. The name surfaced unbidden, heavy with implication. Alpha King. Myth. Absence made flesh. He had carried her out of the ruins of the Night Eclipse estate as if it were nothing, as if she were not a thing to be discarded but something worth protecting. That alone set every warning she possessed screaming. The door opened without sound. Cain entered the room with the same controlled stillness she remembered, his presence immediately altering the space. He did not rush toward her, did not crowd the bed or reach for her. He simply stood within sight, close enough to command attention, far enough to allow distance. He looked different here, stripped of the spectacle of the ballroom. Dark clothing, functional rather than ornamental, scars visible along his neck and hands. Power clung to him, not worn like regalia, but embedded into his posture. He did not need to speak for the weight of reality to press down on her. Her awakening had not happened in isolation. Whatever she had become on those steps had sent a signal across the territory, loud enough to be heard by those attuned to ancient power. Cain's presence alone confirmed that. The Alpha King did not appear for curiosities or accidents. He appeared for threats and turning points. Myra braced herself instinctively, shoulders tight, ready for the cost to be named. Cain did not demand anything from her body. He did not restrain her or issue commands. Instead, he laid out the situation with ruthless clarity, not as a captor, but as a man who understood the scale of what had been unleashed. The Council of Elders had felt it. The surge of power, raw and unmistakable, had cut through wards and borders alike. Old enemies, long dormant, would feel it too. Forces Myra had never known existed now knew her name, or would soon. The world had shifted, and there was no possibility of returning to obscurity. Then came the truth. The story Myra had lived with her entire life began to unravel, strand by strand, until it barely resembled reality. She had not been born broken. She had not failed to awaken. The absence of her wolf had never been natural. It had been engineered. For years, her body had been fed a suppressive compound in doses small enough to avoid detection, strong enough to keep her wolf locked in a state of artificial dormancy. Not dead. Not gone. Asleep. Her weakness had been manufactured, her compliance cultivated through chemical restraint. Every humiliation, every punishment, every reminder of her inferiority had rested on a lie deliberately maintained. Her past, too, had been constructed. The parents she remembered only through whispered stories were not the origin she had been told. The truth was older, darker, and far more dangerous. Myra was the last known heir of the Silver Line, an ancient bloodline that had once ruled above the packs, wolves whose power did not conform to hierarchy or law. They had been conduits rather than subjects, embodiments of something closer to the source itself. The Silver Line had been nearly erased centuries ago by zealots who believed power should be pure, controlled, predictable. The fanatics of blood purity had hunted them relentlessly, rewriting history until the line became legend, then myth, then nothing at all. Myra was not nothing. The revelation landed with crushing force. Anger flared, sharp and disorienting, followed closely by grief for a self she had never been allowed to know. Her entire life had been shaped by deliberate sabotage. The attic, the silence, the beatings masked as discipline, the calculated cruelty of Vivienne and others like her. It had all been permitted because she had been neutralized. Cain watched her carefully through it all, not with pity but with assessment. He did not soften the reality or attempt to shield her from its implications. This was not a confession meant to comfort. It was a warning. In him, Myra sensed something dangerous and compelling. He did not look at her like Rowan had, seeing a problem to be managed or an image to protect. He did not look at her like the pack had, as prey or refuse. Cain looked at her as a force that had finally surfaced, unpredictable and potentially catastrophic. The tension between them was immediate and unsettling. It was not built on tenderness or rescue, but on collision. He was control, discipline, calculated restraint. She was newly awakened power, raw and untrained, carrying centuries of suppressed potential in her blood. Their proximity crackled with unspoken challenge. She did not trust him, and she did not submit to him. That alone marked her as different from everyone else in his domain. Cain offered her a choice, though it was framed honestly enough that she recognized the limits of it. Protection and training within the northern fortress, under his authority, in exchange for trust and cooperation. Not obedience, but alignment. He did not promise peace, happiness, or redemption. He promised survival and mastery over the power that could otherwise consume her or be used to destroy others. The alternative was freedom in name only. A new identity, exile into the human world, constant flight from enemies who would never stop hunting her. A wolf inside her that would grow restless and feral without guidance. Madness or exposure would be inevitable. For the first time in her life, Myra was not choosing between suffering and survival. She was choosing between erasure and authorship. She chose to stay. The decision did not feel like relief. It felt like stepping onto a blade's edge with open eyes. She did not choose Cain because he was safe. She chose him because he was honest about the danger, and because something in her refused to remain small any longer. She did not want to simply endure another day. She wanted to understand what she was and decide what to do with it. The moment that resolve settled, the fortress shifted around her. Cain received the report without visible reaction, but the air in the room tightened immediately. Scouts at the perimeter had sighted a familiar banner. Rowan Blackwood stood at the gates of the northern stronghold with an armed escort, demanding entry. He framed his demand carefully, invoking pack custom and distorted law, rewriting the night of rejection as a procedural error rather than a deliberate choice. He did not come as a penitent. He came as a claimant. He wanted her returned. Not as Myra Holloway, the servant he had discarded, but as the symbol of power she had become. He wanted the silver he had thrown into the snow, now that it shone too brightly to ignore. From the window, mountains loomed in silent witness, ancient and unmoved. Inside the northern fortress, Myra felt the weight of her choice settle fully into place. The past had found her again, not with remorse, but with hunger. And this time, she was not unarmed. The throne hall of the northern fortress was built to intimidate without ornament. Its walls were carved directly from the mountain's living rock, dark and unyielding, bearing the scars of centuries rather than decoration. Torches burned along the sides in disciplined symmetry, their flames steady despite the cold that lingered even indoors. This was not a place for comfort or spectacle. It was a place where outcomes were decided and remembered. By the time Rowan Blackwood was escorted inside, the hall had already become a stage. Representatives of multiple packs stood along the perimeter, warriors and elders alike forming a silent gallery of judgment. Some had traveled for days after feeling the surge of power that had torn through the land. Others had come out of obligation, curiosity, or fear. All of them understood that whatever unfolded here would ripple far beyond these stone walls. The air carried tension, sharpened by history, law, and blood. Rowan walked at the center of attention as naturally as he breathed. Even stripped of the illusion of control he had worn at the Night Eclipse estate, he carried himself with the confidence of a man raised to expect obedience. His injuries from the night of the awakening were gone, but the damage to his authority was not so easily hidden. His eyes burned with something brittle and determined, his focus fixed forward as if the outcome were already decided in his favor. He did not come to beg. He came to claim. The elders listened as he invoked the law of first bond, a clause so old it had faded into theoretical study rather than practice. It existed for moments when bonds formed improperly, when fate moved faster than ritual. According to its language, a bond severed before full awakening could be contested. If the rejection was incomplete or invalid, the claim remained unresolved. It was a law written in an era when wolves were governed as much by conquest as by order. As Rowan presented his argument, the hall shifted. Murmurs spread quietly as elders conferred, weighing precedent against consequence. The law was dangerous not because it was unjust, but because it forced living beings into frameworks meant to control chaos. In this world, even instinct and attachment were subject to arbitration. The decision came without ceremony. The claim was deemed disputable. The bond's severance would be resolved by trial. By blood. The announcement transformed the atmosphere instantly. A trial of blood was not simply combat. It was judgment rendered through survival, a ritualized violence designed to satisfy both law and instinct. The result would be irreversible. Victory would grant unquestioned legitimacy. Defeat would erase all claims. Cain Ravencroft stepped forward without hesitation, his intent unmistakable. As Alpha King, he could stand as champion, end the matter swiftly, and ensure Myra's safety through sheer dominance. His presence alone made several elders uneasy. The power he carried was not subtle, and his willingness to intervene threatened to tip the trial from resolution into execution. Myra understood that moment with startling clarity. If Cain fought for her, the outcome would be unquestioned, but so would the narrative. She would remain the girl pulled from the snow, protected by a greater force. Her power would always be framed as something dangerous that required control, something that needed a king to wield it properly. The world would never see her as sovereign in her own right. She stepped forward instead. The movement drew every eye in the hall. She stood alone on the stone floor, smaller than Rowan, smaller than Cain, but no longer diminished. There was no hesitation in her posture, no uncertainty in the way she claimed space. The silver line in her blood stirred, not explosively, but with coiled restraint. She did not challenge the law. She accepted it on her own terms. By choosing to fight herself, Myra crossed a threshold that could not be undone. It was not bravery in the traditional sense. It was authorship. From that moment on, whatever happened would belong to her alone. The elders acknowledged her choice. The circle of ice lay beyond the fortress walls, carved into a frozen valley where wind scoured stone and snow without mercy. It was an ancient arena, older than the fortress itself, designed to strip combatants of comfort and advantage. Ice covered the ground in a thick, translucent sheet, its surface scarred by the marks of countless past trials. At dawn, the sky above it burned pale red as sunlight crested the peaks, casting long shadows across the frozen expanse. The crowd gathered in silence along the carved tiers, cloaked against the cold. Their breath fogged the air as anticipation coiled tight among them. The trial was not entertainment. It was a reckoning. Rowan entered the circle first. He moved with confidence born of training and repetition. His body bore the marks of a seasoned fighter, muscle memory refined through years of dominance asserted and defended. He understood violence as language and had spoken it fluently since youth. To him, this was not a risk. It was restoration. Myra followed. She wore no armor beyond her own control. The cold bit into her skin immediately, but it did not slow her. Her awareness expanded, senses calibrating to the environment with unnatural precision. Every sound, every shift of air, every tremor through the ice registered clearly. Fear hovered at the edge of her mind, but it did not command her. Something older and steadier held the reins. The trial began without ritual flourish. Rowan advanced first, asserting dominance the way he always had. His initial strikes were calculated not to end the fight, but to degrade her. He moved to humiliate before he destroyed, reinforcing the hierarchy he believed immutable. In his mind, the outcome was predetermined, and this was merely the process of reminding everyone why. Myra did not respond as expected. She did not retreat or brace. She moved with abrupt efficiency, her reactions bypassing conscious thought. Where Rowan relied on technique and strength, she relied on timing and instinct. Her body flowed around his attacks, steps precise and economical, conserving energy, refusing to be drawn into his rhythm. The difference unsettled him immediately. As the exchange intensified, it became clear that Myra was not fighting to impress or intimidate. She fought to control. Each movement denied Rowan the satisfaction of spectacle. She did not snarl or posture. She adapted. The moment came when restraint was no longer sufficient. The silver wolf surged to the surface, not as an explosion, but as an assertion. Light rippled across her skin as the transformation began, bones shifting and reforming with brutal elegance. Fur erupted in a wave of metallic sheen, silver catching the dawn light and reflecting it outward until the circle seemed to glow from within. Her form expanded rapidly, dwarfing Rowan as the ground trembled beneath her weight. The air itself responded. Pressure rolled outward from her presence, a palpable force that made breath catch in the throats of onlookers. This was not mere size or strength. It was authority made manifest, an echo of something primal and ancient that did not ask permission to exist. Rowan shifted to meet her, his black wolf form powerful and aggressive, jaws snapping as he launched himself forward. The impact was violent, claws scraping across ice, bodies colliding with thunderous force. For a brief moment, it appeared evenly matched. Then Rowan changed tactics. Desperation sharpened his movements as he sought advantage through means that violated the unspoken honor of the trial. He aimed for vulnerable joints, attempted to blind and destabilize rather than overpower. It was the strategy of a man who feared losing control more than losing the fight itself. Myra felt the shift immediately. Pain flared as teeth tore into her flank, blood bright against silver fur. The instinct to kill surged, fierce and intoxicating. Her jaws closed around Rowan's shoulder, crushing muscle and forcing a howl from his throat. The crowd leaned forward, breath held, sensing the imminent end. She had him. Rowan was pinned against the ice, her weight crushing him down, claws embedded in his chest. His pulse thudded violently beneath her teeth, fast and frantic. One movement would have ended everything. One bite would have granted her absolute victory and permanent silence. She stopped. The decision cut through instinct with surgical precision. Myra released her hold just enough to force him into awareness. She pressed him deeper into the ice, her dominance undeniable, her control absolute. Rowan's resistance collapsed under the pressure, his body betraying him as survival instinct overrode pride. Submission followed. It was not gentle, it was total. The silver wolf stepped back, allowing space as Rowan lay broken and exposed against the frozen ground. The transformation reversed moments later, leaving Myra standing in human form amid the wreckage of the fight, breath steady despite the blood on her skin. The silence that followed was profound. No one spoke. No one moved. The implications of what they had witnessed settled slowly, heavily. An Omega had not only defeated an Alpha, she had done so without surrendering to brutality. She had chosen restraint over execution, authority over spectacle. The elders recorded the outcome without commentary. The law had been satisfied. The claim was resolved. Rowan Blackwood was defeated. As Myra turned away from the circle, the cold no longer seemed capable of touching her. She had crossed the final boundary between survival and sovereignty. The world had watched her choose who she would become, and there was no returning to the shadows after that. The ice court stood as witness to a new truth. Power had changed hands, not through inheritance or rescue, but through will. Victory did not bring relief. It ignited a countdown. The trial had torn something loose inside Myra that no ritual could contain. The exertion, the transformation, the exposure of her power before witnesses had accelerated a biological process older than law. Heat bloomed beneath her skin in relentless waves, sharp and disorienting, carrying with it a scent that did not ask permission to exist. It spread outward from her body like a signal flare, saturating the air with a truth every unmated alpha recognized instinctively. This was not desire shaped by emotion or choice. It was a primal summons, a command written into flesh, and it turned proximity into danger. The crowd felt it immediately. Postures changed. Breathing deepened. Eyes darkened with instinctual hunger that overrode discipline and reason. Even those who fought it felt their control thinning, their bodies responding faster than their minds could restrain them. The ice court, moments ago frozen in judgment, shifted into a volatile mass of suppressed urges and sharpened attention. The threat was not personal. It was environmental. A single spark in a room full of dry fuel. Kane reacted without hesitation. He moved Myra away from the circle with decisive force, placing himself between her and the gathering alphas, his own authority slamming down like a barrier. Orders rippled through the fortress with brutal efficiency, guards forming ranks, weapons drawn, access points sealed. Mercy had no place here. Protection required violence, and Kane delivered it with practiced precision. Anyone who moved too close was forced back, restrained, or removed entirely. The message was clear. Approach meant death. Myra struggled to remain upright, every nerve ending screaming as the heat intensified. The silver line within her responded aggressively, power surging in unstable pulses that threatened to tear free again. She fought it, jaw clenched, vision blurring as she tried to anchor herself to something solid. Control was slipping, and she knew what would happen if she lost it in a space this crowded. The consequences would be catastrophic. The alarms sounded before she could steady herself. A deep, resonant blast echoed through the fortress, followed by the sharp wail of warning signals cutting through stone corridors. The sound carried urgency, not confusion. This was not an accident or an internal breach. It was an attack. The first explosion hit the outer wall with concussive force, stone shuddering beneath their feet. Dust rained from the ceiling as the fortress responded, ancient defenses activating in sequence. Torches flared brighter. Gates slammed shut. The air filled with the metallic tang of impending violence. The pureblood fanatics had arrived. They came masked in silver, faces hidden behind polished visors etched with old symbols of blood purity and eradication. Their objective was not conquest or negotiation. It was extermination. The silver line, long thought extinct, had revealed itself, and they had followed the signal like predators tracking wounded prey. They moved with fanatic precision, exploiting weaknesses in the outer defenses with technology designed specifically to counter wolf physiology. Chaos erupted. Corridors became battlefields, stones slick with blood and debris as guards and attackers collided. The fortress, built to withstand sieges, groaned under the assault as fire licked along its walls. Myra was caught between internal collapse and external annihilation, her body demanding release while enemies closed in from every direction. The pureblood leader emerged amid the chaos, wielding a device that screamed with ultrasonic force. The sound sliced through heightened senses like knives, reducing even the strongest wolves to writhing figures clutching their heads. Warriors fell, incapacitated by agony rather than injury. The weapon was not meant to kill. It was meant to break resistance, to render wolves helpless before execution. Kane staggered under its effect, teeth bared as he fought through the pain to reach Myra. His control frayed, muscles trembling as the assault battered his nervous system. Nearby, Rowan Blackwood, battered and humiliated but still alive, was dragged into the fight by necessity rather than allegiance. He fought alongside Kane without trust or forgiveness, driven by the brutal understanding that if the fortress fell, none of them would survive. Myra dropped to her knees. The sonic assault amplified the heat inside her, shattering what little control she had left. Her vision fractured into white-hot fragments as silver light bled through her skin, veins glowing faintly beneath the surface. She felt herself splitting again, the familiar threshold looming, but this time something was different. Fear no longer dominated her response. Instead, clarity arrived. She understood, with sudden and terrible certainty, that dividing herself had been the true weakness all along. The girl who had learned to endure and the wolf sealed away for survival were not separate entities. They were parts of a whole that had been forcibly fractured. The pain came from resisting that truth, from clinging to a version of herself shaped by suppression and cruelty. Myra stopped fighting the heat. She let it move through her without resistance, without judgment. She accepted the wolf not as a weapon or curse, but as an extension of herself. The division collapsed. The silver surged, not explosively, but coherently, aligning into something vast and controlled. The sonic weapon faltered. Silver light erupted outward from Myra in a controlled shockwave, not destructive, but absolute. The suppressive frequencies shattered under the pressure, devices cracking and failing as the air itself seemed to reject them. The fanatics staggered, their formation breaking as their advantage evaporated in an instant. Myra rose. She did not shift fully. She did not need to. The power manifested through her human form, eyes blazing with molten gold as the silver line asserted dominion. The temperature in the corridor spiked sharply, metal warping, stone cracking as energy coiled around her like a living crown. She moved forward with unhurried certainty, each step dismantling resistance before it could form. The pureblood leader attempted to retreat, ideology crumbling in the face of undeniable reality. Myra ended the threat without spectacle. The force she unleashed reduced him to ash, his presence erased as completely as the lies he had carried. There was no victory cry, no satisfaction drawn from the act, only resolution. The remaining attackers fled or fell, their conviction shattered along with their ranks. The fortress held. When the energy finally receded, exhaustion crashed into Myra with devastating force. Her knees buckled, vision dimming as the heat drained away, leaving behind trembling limbs and ragged breath. Cain reached her before she could fall, catching her weight with both arms, his own control finally giving way as relief and recognition flooded his expression. What bound them shifted in that moment. It was no longer a calculated alliance or strategic necessity. It was a choice forged under fire, in blood and ruin, made without illusion. They stood together not because one saved the other, but because they had survived the same crucible and emerged aligned. Rowan watched from the edge of the chaos. He saw Myra in Cain's arms, silver light fatting from her skin, and understood at last what he had lost long before the rejection. He had mistaken power for image, worth for optics, and discarded the one thing that could never be reclaimed. There was no anger left in him, only a hollow acceptance. He turned away without ceremony, leaving the fortress behind along with the version of himself that had believed control was the same as strength. Time passed. The northern fortress became more than a stronghold. It became a center of gravity. Under Myra's influence, law shifted from punishment to structure, from exploitation to consequence. The Night Eclipse estate was stripped of its former identity, its name erased and replaced with one that reflected accountability rather than dominance. Those who had built themselves on cruelty found themselves brought low, forced to endure the systems they had once enforced on others. Vivienne Marrow fell farthest of all. Reduced to anonymity and service, she tasted the weight of invisibility she had wielded like a weapon. There was no vengeance in her downfall, only balance restored. When Myra finally stepped before the gathered packs months later, she did so without armor or illusion. Silver crowned her presence not as ornament, but as truth. She did not promise mercy. She promised law that could not be bent to excuse abuse, a future where weakness was not synonymous with worthlessness. The court that had once laughed at a servant knelt. Not because she demanded it, but because the silver they had tried to bury had risen, undeniable and unbreakable, crowned by fire and choice rather than fear. Story written and directed for Dark Hearts Collection. Thank you for being part of this silence between storms. More stories soon.